Greetings, film fanatics. Filmholmes here, and welcome to another rendition of Too Many Movies. So the new Ghostbusters movie is coming out very soon, and there's been a lot of controversy surrounding it ever since the first trailer appeared and was really not well received. And honestly, I didn't like it either. It looked like a complete piece of shit. The jokes were awful, the writing was bad, it was cheesy and not in a good way, the CG wasn't anything, like the CG of the ghost wasn't anything special at all. And it just came off as a crappy reboot. And that's what this is a reboot. But before that, I was really excited. Like, yeah, I would love to have a Ghostbusters 3. That's never going to happen. They waited way too long, and Harold Ramis is no longer with us, unfortunately. But the idea of an all-female Ghostbusters, I like that idea. I like funny women. I like funny women in movies, and I still think they're underappreciated. And I was excited in the women they got for this, all very funny women and good comedians and, good actresses as well. So I like that. But to me, it just came off as it was way too much like the very first movie. They stole too much, and they shouldn't have called it Ghostbusters. It should have been called, like, The New Ghostbusters or something. I don't know. I think that was a strike against it in a lot of fans' eyes. Some people are very, very high on the first Ghostbusters movie, and for good reason. The first Ghostbusters movie is one of the best movies ever made. It's one of the best comedies ever made. It's one of the best movies of the 80s. It is one of the most loved movies of all time. Ghostbusters 2, not so much. But still, the Ghostbusters franchise is huge. Huge. Like, not on par with Star Wars, but close. I mean, in terms of merchandise and TV shows and everything else, like, it's a big franchise for only having really 2 movies. And that's saying something, because the first movie is just so loved, and I love it too. The new one, though, I wasn't going to go see it, but since I started doing this show, I thought, if I ended up really hating it, that'll make a good, entertaining episode. If I end up kind of liking it, I want to tell people that too. And the early reviews are out, and they're not bad. They're not mediocre, they're good. People are saying, like, it's a better movie than you think, it's just not great. And that's what I figured it would be. It's just the trailers did not make it look very good. The newer trailers have been a lot better, but fans just still aren't really buying it. So unfortunately, this movie may be a flop. I hope it's not if it's actually not bad, because I don't want this to be... This has a lot riding on it in terms of 4 women starring in a big franchise. That's huge. And I want it to go well, because I want that to continue in Hollywood. And they're going to, people are trying to say, like, oh, it's a, men don't want to see it because it's 4 women. It's like, no, men don't want to see it because it's probably going to be a bad movie. James Rolfe, the angry video game nerd, I've talked about it before, he came out and said some stuff about it. He got shit on by a lot of people when he said he wasn't going to watch it at all. It's because he has a love for the original movie, or even movies, and this one he said, not interested. After watching those trailers, not interested. And he has every right to not frickin' watch it. He didn't bash it because it starred 4 women. It just looked like a shitty movie. But people want to turn, people's opinions upside down on the internet. The internet is such a vile place at times, and it really bothers me. But what are you going to do? People are entitled to their opinions, and I'm going to give my opinion about the first 2 Ghostbusters movie in this review. And then in the future, after I watch the Ghostbusters movie, the new one, I will put a review up of that as well. But let's go ahead and talk about what many people consider to be, well, the finest 80s movie to come out of the 80s, and one of the best movies of all time, Ghostbusters. Okay, the very first Ghostbusters, one of the greatest movies to come out of the 80s, and one of the greatest movies of all time. And I know I've said that like 15 times, but that's really true. When I went and rewatched both of these, it hit me, I'm like, the first Ghostbusters is such a tight movie, and it's such an original idea, but it's so funny. It's one of the best comedies ever made as well. And the cast is, Harold Ramis, Dan Aykroyd, who also wrote the script, and Ivan Reitman did a great job directing it. But Bill Murray as Peter Venkman, how can you go wrong there? One of the best characters out of the 80s as well. And Ernie Hudson doesn't get the respect he deserves because he wasn't in the movie very much. He was in the sequel a little bit more. But I love Ernie Hudson, and he was great for what he did. And what can you say about it that hasn't been said a million times before? It's scary. It's hilarious. It's dramatic. The ghosts, I think the ghost in the movie, the effects, they hold up very, very well and still look very realistic in a lot of ways. Sometimes not so much, but the movie's 30 years old. What do you expect? That's why the movie has lived on for so long, because it is timeless. It really is. It's not a movie about a time period. It's just a movie about the Ghostbusters. And it's so original. No one's ever done an idea like this before or since. How can you? Because you're not going to do it better than Ghostbusters. It's not a horror movie. It's a comedy. But it has horror elements. It's scary sometimes. Rick Moranis as Louis Tully, my favorite character in the movie outside of Peter Venkman. He's freaking hilarious. Sigourney Weaver, one of the biggest actresses of the 80s from the Alien franchise and Ghostbusters, she's great in it as Dana Barrett, and her and Bill Murray's scenes are freaking funny as hell. But, these three guys get kicked out of their college and they study the paranormal. They decide to go into business for themselves and become what are called Ghostbusters. And eventually ghosts show up around New York City. They get a little famous. They catch the ghosts. And I mean, how many lines can you quote from this movie? I can quote like 20 or 30. I blame myself. So do I. Like the speech at the beginning. Ray, call it fate. Call it. I'm going to get it wrong, but like when he's talking to Dan Aykroyd at the college, figuring out their future. One that I like is, don't worry about it, Ray. Everybody has 3 mortgages nowadays. I don't know why. I just love how he's so nonchalant about it. Because Bill Murray, that's his character, and it works, and it's freaking funny. But everybody shines. Even Ernie Hudson gets a couple really good lines. What about Bill Murray's? What about the Twinkie? Just little lines like that even. Not the most famous lines. We all know the famous lines. Don't cross the streams. We all know this. Even if you haven't seen the movies, you know the lines. That's how great this movie is. That's how much it's become of pop culture. And I don't know how you can't like this movie. If you don't, fine. I think you're missing out. But your choice, whoever you are, you dumbass. But, what can you say? The story is epic. Dana Barrett, her apartment is haunted, and Zool, it comes in with a dog, basically, in her refrigerator saying Zool, and they're, the Keymaster Gatekeeper have to get together, and in comes Gozer to destroy the world. And it's kind of terrifying, and only the Ghostbusters can save them, but people don't know. Are they faking this? Are they not? People believe it if they've seen it, but like the cops and the government there, they don't really believe it, It's not... I can't go into much more detail if you haven't seen it. You need to see it. It is a classic piece of cinema, a classic film, and this has to be in your collection. I already had this on DVD. When it came out on Blu-ray, it was $15. I went, yeah, I want it on Blu-ray. It's Ghostbusters. I want it in better quality, better sound. Why wouldn't I? That's how good the movie is. You'll keep rebuying it just so you'll keep having better versions of it, because it's that good. Great casting, great writing, a great script, a great performance by Bill Murray as Peter Venkman, who really keeps the comedy going, but all the other comedy is great too. It's scary at times, it's dramatic at times. Sigourney Weaver, Louis Tully, Ivan Reitman did a great job directing. It was a movie that was really ahead of its time, but I'm glad they made it then, because it is almost a perfect movie. Ghostbusters, the first one, is a 5 out of 5. Easy, and I don't see many people disagreeing with me on that. It is entertaining as hell. It is a summer blockbuster, but it could come out any time of the year and it would still be as big a hit as it was then, because it's that good. And I saw this in the theater, at a theater that showed older movies, and it was so cool to see Ghostbusters up on the big screen. One of the best cinematic experiences of my life. Such a fun time. But let's move on to the sequel that was not supposed to happen. Ghostbusters was supposed to be a one-off film, but the studio convinced Dan Aykroyd and Harold Ramis to write another one, and it's not as well received, but I think you'll be surprised about what I say about it. So Ghostbusters 2, the sequel that a lot of people wanted, but it wasn't supposed to happen. The first Ghostbusters, it wrapped up everything, and there wasn't going to be a sequel, but, I mean, They had an animated series come out, all this merchandise. Ghostbusters was one of the biggest franchises of the 80s, yet there was only one movie. And so Ghostbusters 2, there it is, Ghostbusters 2, came out, and it did decent. It was not well received by critics, and not really well received by audiences either. And this has always made me mad. I'm going to put this down, actually. Because Ghostbusters 2, after I rewatched it recently, it's not a bad movie, and it's not a bad sequel. What were you people expecting out of this? I mean, seriously, it's a sequel to one of the best movies ever made. It's not going to be nearly as good, and they're going to have to reuse elements from the first movie to make it work again, which they did. It kind of is the same as the first movie. Like, really, Dana Barrett, how unlucky is she? Because she's not haunted, her apartment was. But then all of a sudden, there's this beast trying to steal her child. How unlucky is this woman? So I didn't like that part, but they had to put Dana back in the story somehow, and I'm glad she was there. Louis Tully had a much bigger part, which made me so happy. I was thrilled, and he's great in the movie. I love Rick Moranis. And we get to see the whole cast back together, and the writing is still good. The story is epic. There's just a lot more cheese in this movie. I don't like the ending with all the people singing outside. I fucking hate that. That was cheesy bullshit that should not have been in that movie. They really, for the same people that wrote Ghostbusters, such a great script, that's the ending you're going with? Okay. I'm not saying it didn't make sense, but it just sucked. So I'm not big on the ending of this movie. But it's still very entertaining, and it's fun to see these guys in a new movie. Not just rewatch the first Ghostbusters, which I have a million times. It's fun to see them in a new adventure. I mean, you had the cartoon series of the 80s, but it wasn't the same actors, and it was more for kids. So it was fun to see a live-action Ghostbusters again, and it was Ghostbusters 2. And it's kind of why there was never a Ghostbusters 3. Mainly because Bill Murray wasn't going to come back, because he didn't like the idea of Ghostbusters 2. I think everyone did do it for a paycheck, but they still put their all into it. They tried to make a good sequel. They failed, but they still succeeded in some ways. And I don't think it's not nearly as bad as people make it out to be. I still very much enjoy the second one. After I watched the first one, I want to watch the second one. I do, and I'm probably in a small majority, but that's how I feel. And if people hate it, I don't blame them, but I don't think it's a wreck like a lot of people make it out to be. It's far from it. So Ghostbusters 2, I mean, I didn't go over the story, but basically Dana Barrett has a problem again, and she goes, her baby is almost stolen, but the Ghostbusters have disbanded. Winston and Ray, Dan Aykroyd's character, they're still doing Ghostbusters stuff, like going to parties, and it's kind of clever. The kids are growing out of Ghostbusters. They don't really care because it's been like 5 years since the first movie, so kids are moving on, and they want He-Man, and Egon has moved on to work at a college. Peter Venkman does this bogus psychic show, and I love that part of the movie. It's so funny. It's Bill Murray in his element, just sarcastic a-hole, and I love it. But eventually the Ghostbusters get back together when they try to figure out what's going on with Dana Barrett, and that's the rest of the movie is I can't remember his name, the Carpathian. I can't remember his name, but it's a painting that is actually like real and wants to come back to life, and he wants to put himself into Dana Barrett's baby. I don't know why you can't find another baby. Why does it have to be Dana Barrett's? But that's the way it is. And shenanigans, really scary stuff, some pretty scary moments, and some fun stuff and some stupid stuff happens until the end of the movie. And you either like it or you don't. I particularly do like it, but it's a sequel that probably should not have been made. But if you don't like it, just keep loving the first one if you did. So, to me, Ghostbusters 2, I give it a 3.5 out of 5. It may be too high. Some people are like, nah, 2.5, 3 at the most. For you, fine. But for me, I think it's 3.5. I was going to give it a 3 until I rewatched it, and I was like, I enjoy this a lot more than I remember. I like a lot of elements. There's still a lot of quotable lines. Bill Murray, and you don't want us exposing ourselves. Like, stuff like that. Egon, I think they're more interested in my epididymis. It's some funny banter between the main characters. It's funny, and Ernie Hudson gets a lot more to do in the sequel, which I'm glad they did that, because he deserved it. He does a great job. But 3.5 out of 5. I'd say if you haven't seen it in a long time, give it another chance. Give it another chance, and you may be pleasantly surprised. Or you may just throw it in the trash. But that's what I think about Ghostbusters 2. So there you go. Ghostbusters 1 and 2, two of the biggest movies of the 1980s. Well, one's one of the biggest movies of the 1980s. The other one is a sequel. But those are my thoughts on them, and we'll see what I feel about the new Ghostbusters. If it's a piece of crap, I'm going to say it's a piece of crap. If I think it's actually pretty good, I'm going to say it's pretty good. I'm not going to say what everybody else is saying. I'm going to say what I'm thinking. But if for whatever reason you're bummed because you don't get Ghostbusters 3, if you're a gamer at all, go play Ghostbusters, the video game, for PS3 or 360. Don't play the Wii one. Because that really is the third Ghostbusters movie. If you don't know what I'm talking about, Dan Aykroyd, Harold Ramis, they wrote the game. There's a new Ghostbuster, a fifth one, which you play, a nameless guy, but Bill Murray, Dan Aykroyd, Harold Ramis, Ernie Hudson, and even Annie Potts, who plays the secretary, and even Dickless from the first movie, you can figure out who that is, he supplies his voice, but it's all the original Ghostbusters, they supply their voices. Harold Ramis did it before he died. I think a couple years before he died. It's a really good game. You get to be a Ghostbuster. It's really a great game. I think severely underrated. But it is the third movie, basically. Dana Barrett's not in it. Louis Tully's not in it. But it's the third movie. So if you want a third one, go play that one. You will not be disappointed. It's repetitive eventually, but the story is epic as hell. They basically go to hell, which is what they wanted for the third movie. And I haven't played it for a long time, and maybe I'll play it again. Or somebody else who lives in this apartment will play it again and maybe talk about it later. Who knows? But go play that if you've never heard of it, or if you want to give it a chance, please do. But at the same time, there's something else that came out, probably because the new Ghostbusters is coming out, but they re-released the Ghostbusters animated series. Now, they're doing it in 2 parts. This one's 5 discs, and it's, I think, 55 episodes or something. And I love this animated show. I don't care if I'm 30, it's still a good animated show. And I'm excited to rewatch all these because before this, the Ghostbusters Steelbooks and the complete collection were very, very expensive, and I just didn't have the money to do this. When I got it, this was $30. And I'm hoping when the new one comes out, I think in September, that'll be $30 too. $60 for the complete series. I'm down for that, because it's the real Ghostbusters, and I'm a huge Ghostbusters fanatic. Not as big as other people, but I love the Ghostbusters franchise. I love this show, so if you are down on the new movie, go buy this and watch it, because it's more Ghostbusters Adventures, and it's a lot of fun. It's 80s cartoon fun. How can you go wrong? So that's my thoughts on the Ghostbusters franchise. I will do a review of the new Ghostbusters after I see it, which will be very, very soon. This was Too Many Movies. I'm Filmholmes, and I will see you in the next video. Take care.